This is the Leica Q3, the third generation version of Leica's Q series of cameras, which in my opinion is one of the most unique lineups of cameras they have ever made. The question I want to answer today is what makes this $6,000 USD point and shoot camera so special, and how is it that despite the price tag, it's been sold out for months? If you're anything like me, when I first became interested in cameras, you might look at the price tag of the Q3 and think that it's a bit too expensive for a camera that has a fixed lens and doesn't have the long list of best-in-class specs we've all come to expect from modern cameras. To my younger self, I would say that is what makes this camera special. Leica is not focused on being the best in class at any specific on-paper spec. Their philosophy has always been to deliver an experience that makes you want to pick up your camera and make images. The Q3 embodies this approach. It has a new 60 megapixel backside illuminated full frame sensor in the same minimal form factor as its predecessor, with a tweaked button layout and a surprising for Leica new tilting display. This is my first time using a Q series camera, and I have to say, from the moment I first held the Q3, I felt like I immediately started to understand the hype. This camera is beautiful, and while I don't necessarily think that a camera's aesthetics always adds to a better experience, in the case of the Q3, it does. Since I got this camera, I have not left the house without it around my neck. The look of it alone inspires me to be excited to shoot with it, which is not something every camera I've ever used can do on a daily basis. One aspect of the Q3 that I didn't think would stand out to me as much as it did is the new hybrid autofocus system. One challenge that I faced over the last few years shooting on my manual focus only M10 is capturing photos of my son. Because of how much I have grown to love the Leica look, I've still chosen my M10 over my autofocus cameras the majority of the time, despite it being much harder to capture a moving toddler. The Q3 feels like the perfect middle ground. All the richness of the Leica look with the simple practicality of autofocus in a relatively compact form factor. Reflecting on the overall performance of the autofocus, it was a bit of a mixed bag. When set to intelligent AF, I found two distinct quirks with the Q3. The first quirk was that the autofocus often hunted in and out a lot, particularly on static subjects and in low light scenarios. The result of this was some uncertainty if the shot was perfectly in focus when pressing the shutter down. The second and more annoying quirk to me was the behavior I experienced when the shutter was half pressed in IAF mode. When half pressing the shutter to focus on a particular part of the frame, the Q3 would increase or lower the exposure of the image about a stop in order to grab focus accurately. This becomes an issue because if you hold your shutter down halfway and wait a while before actually taking the shot, you end up looking at an incorrect exposure that is not what is actually captured in the final image. This can lead you to misjudge your exposure in split-second moments. I ended up setting the camera focus mode to autofocus single, so when half pressing the shutter you only end up with a brief exposure up or down, and then the camera returns to the correct exposure that you intended. The caveat to this is that you lose out on the benefits of the intelligent switching between autofocus single and autofocus continuous. It's possible your shooting style won't be affected at all by these autofocus quirks, and I want to be clear that I actually found the autofocus to be quite accurate in most of my shots. The face and eye detection was particularly good with shots of my son, so despite the quirks, I'm happy with the shots that I got, especially of him, because I would otherwise have probably missed some of these shots on my M10. The most surprising change Leica made from the Q2 to the Q3 was the addition of this tilting screen. I really appreciate their inclusion of this because I have always disliked cameras that do not have a good option for shooting for the hip. It's the main reason that despite my M10 being a great rangefinder, I always opt to use my EVF with it because it allows the immediate convenience and look that you get from shooting from a lower point of view. I do wish that the display was a bit easier to pull out from the camera because the hinge that Leica designed feels almost overbuilt. It's quite stiff and requires more force to tilt down than I would like. This issue is particularly noticeable when you want to tilt it down quickly when a good opportunity for a shot comes up. The EVF built into the body is bright, sharp, and what I would expect on a modern camera at this price point. I do like the novelty of how the diopter for the EVF is adjusted. It's a little push button that sits flush with the top of the camera, preventing any accidental knocks to your magnification. Now I want to talk about the most appealing aspect of this entire system, Leica's legendary 28mm Summilux f1.7. But first, I have to tell you about the service that helped me through the testing of the Q3 and the sponsor of today's video, Surfshark. When I set out on a day of photography with a camera like the Q3, I inevitably end up in a public place editing selects while connected to unsecured Wi-Fi. In situations like this, I appreciate having a VPN like Surfshark for a few reasons. I don't have to worry about companies spying on anything I'm doing because Surfshark encrypts all my online activity. When I take breaks from editing, I end up shopping online for camera accessories all the time, and Surfshark helps me save money by preventing websites from using my location or device to hike up their prices. And I often use TV shows and movies as inspiration for my photography, so it helps that Surfshark allows me to access geo-restricted content not available here in Canada. The best part is that Surfshark only costs $2.49 a month, but since it allows unlimited user devices, the more I share my account with my friends and family, the more I can drive that monthly price down. So if you've never used a VPN and you want to give it a shot, head to the first link in the video description and use code BYL at checkout, and you will get it for $2.49 a month plus an extra 3 months for free. If you try it and you don't like it, no problem, because Surfshark has a 30-day money-back guarantee. Now let's look at this lens. The 28mm Summilux, as far as I know, has remained unchanged from the original Q of 2015. That's a very good thing because Leica has done an exceptional job with the design of this lens. Even paired with the new 60 megapixel backside illuminated sensor, this lens resolves images beautifully at this high resolution. Generally, I am not the kind of person who cares very much about resolution in photos because I don't believe higher resolution equates to better feeling images. That being said, stills from this camera are some of the sharpest I have ever shot. Leica has included an in-camera digital zoom that crops shots for a 35mm up to 90mm field of view. This doesn't change any of the characteristics of the look this lens gives, but it is a fun thing to experiment with since this camera has so much resolution to crop in on without a perceived loss in quality. Like other Qs, this lens also has a macro mode built in that allows a minimum focus of 17 centimeters, which is pretty good for a wide lens. I do want to note though that you are limited to f2.8 as your widest stop in this mode, which is not a huge deal because macro shots are best shot at deeper f-stops anyway. I've read a few posts stating that the lens on the Q is actually a 24mm that is corrected in camera to the point where you end up with the 28mm field of view. When I asked Leica about this, they stated that to their knowledge, it is a 28mm lens, which I agree with on paper. But what I can say anecdotally is that from my experience with this lens, it does feel a touch wider than a typical 28mm lens, both in its field of view and the way it renders subjects. Adjusting to the look of this lens took some getting used to, but there is no denying that as I was walking around with the Q3, it took me back to my first year walking around with my first DSLR and the joy that came with practicing photography as an enthusiastic beginner. There was one thing I was not a huge fan of with the lens on the Q3. In order to engage manual focus on this lens, you have to push a tiny little button on the lens collar. In practice, I didn't find this button very easy to engage, especially in the moment. The silver lining to this is that the manual focus on this lens feels very immediate despite it being a focus-by-wire lens, and it's among the best I've ever used. Leica also improved the battery this generation, going from 1800 mAh to 2200 mAh. In my use, I was actually able to get by with a single battery with 8 hours of shooting, regularly turning the camera off when I had longer stretches of not actively shooting with it. It's also nice that they added Type-C charging, so if you're in a pinch or driving to your next location, you can always just plug the camera into a power bank and top up when appropriate. I do still recommend picking up a second battery for this camera, even if they are $170 USD, which I know is a price that hurts the soul, but I guess Leica assumes if you can afford this camera, then you can pay a lot for a second battery. While we are here at the bottom of the camera, I hope Leica can find a way to move the location of the SD card slot on this camera, because if you add a quick release plate or you use Leica's optional Qi charging grip for the Q3, both will block easy access to the SD card, which would personally bug me over time. A feature that I don't see talked about much with any Leica camera these days is how good the Leica Photos app is. The app UI is well designed, connecting any Leica camera with Wi-Fi is relatively quick. You can remotely control your camera from the app, and the best part is you can transfer raw images directly from your Q3 onto your phone. This means if you're someone who uses Lightroom Mobile, you have an incredibly frictionless way to edit raw photos on a trip or while you are in transit without even needing to transfer the photos you took off your SD card. I wish more camera manufacturers would support raw photo transfer to a phone like this. It obviously does not replace a laptop editing experience, but it adds a level of immediacy to editing that is really enjoyable. It's a bit comical to me that the Q3 is Leica's only camera capable of shooting 8K video at the moment. I have quite a few usability gripes with the video mode, but there is some good here. Starting with the good, the 8K and 4K video looks great out of this camera, particularly if you shoot in L-Log and grade the image in post. Comparing the 8K to the 4K video, it is noticeable that the 8K video has more detail, but I also don't think it makes enough of a difference that shooting 8K is required to get the most of the video from this camera. The color with just Leica's Rec 709 transform LUT I think looks great as a starting point, or honestly fine as it is for casual users who don't want to bother with any complex color grading. Where the video mode struggles for me is in the experience of using it. The Q3 is not designed to be a video camera, and my time using it as such reflects that. Starting with the settings, ISO is the only setting that can be separated when going from photo to video mode. So if you're shooting stills and you have a moment you want to get a quick video of, unless your subject isn't urgently moving, you will probably miss your chance to get it, or use less than ideal settings for the sake of speed. This issue compounds with a few specific control quirks. For example, with the shutter speed dial, you can't get to a specific setting by just turning the thumb wheel over and over. So when I was taking stills and grabbing video clips of these parrots, I had to physically turn the shutter speed dial from auto to 1/60th of a second every single time I switched from photo to video mode, which just made the experience clunky. The optical image stabilization in video was fine when static, but it can suffer from odd looking wobble even with minor movement, which is normal of modern mirrorless cameras as well. Video autofocus performance leaves a lot to be desired. It hunts a lot and is a bit slow, which makes rack focuses look natural, but if your subject is moving quickly, it's just not going to do well. With the I/O, there is no 3.5mm audio input, but Leica is working on adding support for that through the Type-C port. White balance isn't as granular as I would like since it's mapped in chunks as you move up the scale. Lastly, while I appreciate that L-Log is available, at first I thought there wasn't a way to view the footage in Rec 709 when shooting. Then I realized it's buried 7 pages deep in the menu in a subsettings menu for Video Gamma, which does not make it easy to set up and potentially something that someone with less experience could miss entirely. With all that said though, the Q3 is not a video camera, so I don't want to be too critical. The footage looks really good coming out of this camera, and I am excited about future more video focused cameras that Leica will make because the sensor in this camera is great. I said at the beginning of this video, I wanted to understand why this camera has been sold out for months despite its premium price tag. After using it during the process of making this video, I truly get it now. For all its quirks and imperfections, the Q3 improves the experience a Q series camera promises. A camera that you want to take everywhere with you and can deliver a shooting experience that elicits a feeling of joy for photography and creating. That's the most important thing it has to do, and for that, it shines. If you are the kind of person whose main goal with photography is to have a lot of fun doing it, and you can afford this camera, Leica did a great job delivering a mostly frictionless photography experience that almost anyone who is willing to carry a camera can appreciate. I never thought about any accessories I needed to bring with me to use this camera. I just packed it into my bag and went shooting. I hope more brands make cameras that can deliver this kind of experience because it really is special. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you like this video and you want to help me make more videos like this, please check out Surfshark as well as all the links in the video description down below.